Welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving into the latest AI framework called GPTEngineer. This tool claims to read the user requirements in plain text and then just churn out a functioning project. So not just a single file, but a bunch of files related to the user requirements. Now, of course, we have seen attempts at this with frameworks like AutoGPT before, but they did not quite hit the mark. So I'll be building a project. It's not a beginner level project, but it's not super complex also, but it's a decent level of complexity. And we will let GPTEngineer build the entire thing. I will not write a single line of code, and whatever issues arise, I'll let GPTEngineer fix it. So let me tell what exactly is GPTEngineer. It's just a fancy orchestration framework on top of GPT-4. It stores all the prompts as well as the history of the conversation in a text file, and user can just continue whenever they want. And it has some set of predefined prompts which makes it easy to start as a developer. We will be building our very own mini version of IMDB. We will have a Python backend server running using FASTApi. It will have the standard set of CRUD APIs. We will have a database, a SQLite database at the backend for storing the data. We will have a very basic front-end UI also. And we'll also have some additional features like very basic authentication. All of this by GPTEngineer. So this is how the system diagram will look like. Now let's get to the code and let's see if GPTEngineer is actually worth the hype. The first thing is let's install GPTEngineer. Let me go to Google and just search for this. The first result is a relevant repo. So we can see we can install it via pip also. We don't need to clone it. So I'll go to my Visual Studio and let me create a new virtual environment. So now I have activated it. So the next thing is let's just install GPTEngineer. We can see it requires a OpenAI API key as an environment variable. So let's just do this in our terminal. All right, replace this with your actual API key. You can use GPT-4 as well as GPT-3.5. GPT-4 provides better results. Let's just create a new directory which will contain all the code for a new project. So in this case, I'll mini IMDB. Now, mini IMDB, what I'll do is let me just create a file over here, which is called prompt. And in the prompt is where I mention the first prompt, basically the description of my program. So this is my first prompt where I'm telling it to build a movie database like a mini IMDB, and it should have a RESTful CRUD API in Python using FASTApi library. And I want all the operations along with a list all movies. Now, the API should also allow users to add modify movies details, and it should have a SQLite DB in the backend. And we have also mentioned the schema for our movie object. And for create API, we are explicitly mentioning to one, ensure that only the title field is mandatory, and two, to add a randomly generated ID for each new movie which is created. All right, so now we'll go ahead and invoke it. So the easiest way is let me just GPTEngineer and I'll give the path of my project, and that's it. All right, so now it asks me some clarifications. You can see over here. The first question is, can you please provide more details about the RESTful CRUD API in Python using FASTApi, such as the expected endpoints and the functionalities? Use REST principle. So let's see. All right, so it has created some files and it should be in my workspace over here. I can see some files over here, and it has also told me how to actually reload it. I don't want it to run it. Next thing is let's go to this directory mini IMDB and workspace, and let's look at the requirements.txt. Actually, let me just open it here, and I can see there are 4 dependencies. So what we'll do is we'll just All right, so we have our dependencies installed. Now it gave me some command which would be present in run.sh. So let's do this. Let's see if it runs. This is our first attempt. And okay, the server is up. Let me just go to the code and just see how does it look. We have some 5 APIs: create, get, update, delete, and list all. And this seems okay. And here inside each, basically in the data layer, we can see it's connecting to a SQLite database, and the movie ID is getting randomly generated, and this is good. And we have some queries also: select star from movies and delete and so on. All right, so we have a server up. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll actually try to trigger it. Let's see if the APIs are working. All right, the first thing is let's try to create a movie, and I'll create a JSON over here. All right, so let's just start with the title and the director. Okay, we have our internal server error. Let's see what is the problem. No such table movies. So what I'll do is let me just copy this line of code, and what GPTEngineer actually provides is a very handy tool which lets us iterate over solutions. So what we'll do is we'll create a file called feedback, and inside feedback, this is the way to talk to my LLM. So we have a feedback ready. So let's just send it to our GPT-4. So how we do is we use this command. So we tell the path of a project. Right now I'm in the GPT demo directory, and mini IMDB is the name of my project. Steps is use feedback. So whenever we say use feedback, it actually refers to this file, the feedback file we just created. Let me just enter this. Okay, so it has made some changes, and let's go to our workspace, and we can see in our run.sh, basically it has created a file called createtable.py. So let me just go to my workspace and execute this. All right, and now let me just try to get the server up, and let's try to send the requests. Okay, beautiful. So we have created a new movie, and we also got it as a response. The title, the director, release year, and all are empty because we did not configure it. And you can see there's a randomly generated ID also, which is pretty cool. Okay, now we'll pre-populate a database. So I'll provide a feedback to my GPTEngineer to create a script which triggers the API 5 with 5 new entries. So let me just take care. Just notice the directory over here. We need to pass our project directory to our GPTEngineer. And since we are actually inside the directory, that's why we are going back a couple of times. So it has created a new script called addmovies.py. Let me open this up, and we can see it consists of payloads for 5 different movies, and it looks quite right. Now let me go ahead and execute this. So I'm getting this error over here. It's saying that the add test should be a list. I think because in our payload it's comma separated, whereas in my model over here, there should actually be a list. Add test should be a list. So instead of trying to actually do it myself, let me just go to feedback and give this information to GPTEngineer to fix it. Okay, so this is my feedback. I'm asking it to fix it. Instead of a single string separated by comma, it should actually be an array. So okay, so it created a new script, and wow, we can see that the values are actually in an array instead of a single string. Let me go ahead and execute this now. and it gives me an error. But I think let's check the server logs, and I think we did get a 200 okay for all the 5 requests. The error is probably because it's trying to read the response incorrectly. To confirm this, let me go to Postman and try to list everything. And this is amazing. So we have now 6 entries over here, 5 which I added with a script and 1 which was a dummy entry I created originally. Okay, now I want to create a basic UI for each of the API operations. So I'll go ahead and give this feedback. I don't want to use any framework by JS, so I just want to use vanilla JS, and it should have buttons. And I'm also giving an example that for add movie there should be a button with a text form and so on. So let me just trigger this feedback. All right, I think it has created some stuff over here. I can see an index.html and a script.js. Now let me open up my index.html on my browser. All right, so we have 5 buttons for each of the operations. Let me start with list movies. It did not work. Okay, only the add movies is working, but the other buttons are just not working. Interesting. So let me give this feedback to my GPT engineer. Okay, so this is my feedback. Let me just go ahead and execute it. Okay, now we got the response. Let me go ahead and just refresh my index.html. Okay, the UI has changed. Let me try to list the movies. Okay, I can see the movies. Okay, so this is my entry. Now let me go ahead and create this movie. All right, so it has created a movie with the ID 4818, and let me just try to get this movie. And this is my response. So our create API is also working. So this is pretty good. So we have a functioning UI, and now let me go to my GPT engineer and just tell it to just improve the presentation a bit. Let the functionality remain as it is. So this is my feedback. I wanted to basically polish the presentation layer, and I do not want it to change any functionality, just make it pretty. So let's do this. Let me go ahead and refresh this page, and we can see the UI is improved. Let me try to get a movie. Okay, that's nice. Now we can also ask it to prettify specific elements one by one. For example, instead of printing the raw JSON, I wanted to create a table for all the movies operations result, and we can do it for each operation one by one. Okay, so now we also want to add a very basic authentication. So let me go ahead and give this prompt. I want to add basic authentication my APIs, and I'm specifying what is the username and password. And also I'm modifying the JS to ask the username and password whenever someone clicks a button. Let's give this feedback. Okay, so now we have got a response. Let me go ahead and check our main.py if there's something related to authentication over here. So in my main.py, I can see there's an authenticate method, and it has some hard-coded value of John and Vic, and it's obviously doing a very basic check, but it is doing that check. So let me go ahead and try to trigger this. So let me refresh this page and try to list the movies. It asks for my username, which is pretty good, and my password. This is a response of the API. We can see in the code, actually in the JS file, what it does is it asks for username, password, and using that it does the base64 encoding and attaches it to our header. And it's obviously very basic, but it's quite cool given that we did not have to write it ourselves. Now let me try to send a request which does not have the authentication headers. So I'll go to my Postman and I'll try to list all the movies. So get movies. And nice. So we are getting a not authenticated error. So wow, that was pretty cool. We were actually able to build a functioning application of a decent complexity using just natural language. And we don't even need to bother going to ChatGPT and copying the code. It just does it in my IDE itself. That is amazing. Now, of course, it's not going to be able to add a lot of complex business logic, and it's not going to be able to build something very big, especially for our professional use cases. The biggest advantage is for actually small projects. For my personal projects, over the years, I have had multiple ideas, but I have been always too lazy to either build it, or I did not want to learn how to build it. Now, all I need is to write the set of requirements, and GPT Engineer will take care of choosing the correct technology and the correct libraries, and it will give me the initial setup code. And that is pretty brilliant. All I need to do now is just look at the code and just start iterating over it.